Hey class, and welcome to the first of 3 introductory video lectures for GEB 3213, Writing in Business. In this video lecture, we'll talk about the most important, the most foundational principle in all of business and workplace communication, the idea of reader focused. More specifically, we'll talk about some simple tips and techniques that you can use to craft reader-focused messages. Before we get to those tips and techniques, I first want to talk about a larger concept that informs our discussion of reader focus. The larger concept is this. It's the idea that good writing is fundamentally an act of empathy. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that to write well, you must put yourself in your reader's shoes. In other words, you should think about who your reader is. You should think about what they care about, what their goals are. You should think about what kinds of background or contextual information they'll have available as they read your message. You should think about how they're likely to process your message and the context in which they'll encounter it, whether they'll read it on a laptop or a desktop, a tablet, cell phone, etc. Right? You should think about all of those things. But the most important, most foundational thing here is that you should think empathetically as you craft your message. Think about your reader and produce a message that meets them where they are. Now, writing empathetically is challenging under any circumstances, but it's particularly challenging in a business and workplace communication context because our audience members are habitually busy. And so to write well in business, we can't just write empathetically. We must also treat our readers' time as more valuable than our own. In other words, we should spend more time working on and refining our writing so that our readers can spend less time processing and decoding our message. Now, all of this, the contents of the preceding slides, they really just add up to this idea of reader focus, right? If you are writing empathetically, if you are writing in a way that respects your reader's time as more valuable than your own, then you are likely producing a reader-focused message. But that's much easier said than done. And so for the remainder of this video lecture, I'm going to talk about some simple and concrete tips and techniques that we can use to actually put reader focus into practice in our writing. And the first tip is this. You should organize your messages around your reader's needs and not around your thought process. Now, most of us, when we sit down to draft a message, what comes out on the page is not a concise description of what our reader needs to know, but instead a long-winded description of how we arrived at that conclusion or piece of information. Now, that phenomenon, it's totally understandable. We all do it to a certain extent. But in our final version, we must make sure that we've refined the message so that it no longer reflects our thought process, but instead reflects our reader's needs. Next tip. We should also organize our sentences around you or we rather than I. Okay? Because we all experience the world and see the world from our own point of view, we tend to default to I-centered writing. We put ourselves at the center of a lot of different sentences. And again, this is totally understandable, but it does make your individual sentences and your larger message feel writer-focused. And so to put your reader at the center of things, you literally want to put your reader at the center of your sentences. And you can do that by making the subjects of your sentences the words you or we or some variation thereof. If you do that, that will help ensure that you're organizing your message around your reader and their perspective. And finally, you want to prefer polite commands and questions to I would like statements. In business and workplace communication, we're constantly seeking to motivate action. We're oftentimes sending messages because we want somebody to do something. And because we see and experience the world from our own perspective, we oftentimes try to motivate action using I would like statements or something like that. I would like you to send me this document. I would like you to contact this particular client. I would like you to do this. I would like you to do that. Okay? Now, that approach, again, totally understandable, but it's also writer focused. To make your message more reader focused, transform those phrases into polite commands or polite questions. So instead of, I would like you to send me that document, please send me that document. Or could you please send me that document? Both of those approaches are significantly better and significantly more reader focused than I would like statements. Now, let's put these principles into action by looking at a sample message. Now, in this sample message, we've got a person named Marta who's contacting somebody named Pradeep. The subject line of the message is valuing community. The message begins, Pradeep, I've been thinking about our conversation at the team meeting for days. While I was taking my kid to school, I saw all these parents and teachers just talking about the neighborhood and their lives and what matters to their kids. And I remembered what you said about the importance of building community. As you suggested, I think we have a lot to learn from more robust, cohesive communities like my kid's school. And so, after a lot of reflection, I'm ready to sign on to your proposal. Team happy hours would really help bring our employees together and make us better collaborators. Thanks for being such a thoughtful colleague. Best, Marta. Now this message, it's grammatical, it's cohesive, the sentences hang together, it's polite, it's considerate, but it's profoundly writer-focused. It is virtually all about Marta, and very little of it is about Pradeep. And let's look at why this is such a writer-focused message. Now, perhaps most obviously, we've got a lot of I's and my's in this message. Marta is quite literally at the center of virtually every sentence. That's obviously a problem. But a far bigger problem is the fact that this message narrates Marta's thought process. It describes how she arrived at a conclusion that might be relevant to Pradeep, rather than foregrounding, rather than front-loading that conclusion that would be valuable to Pradeep. All right? The only thing that Pradeep probably really cares about here, unless he's good friends with Marta and really cares about her inner life, is that sentence that we've got underlined and in bold. I'm ready to sign on to your proposal. That's the critical sentence in this message, and it doesn't arrive until late in the message. So how can we fix this? So the first thing that we can do is revising this message so that it prioritizes Pradeep and his needs rather than Marta's thought process. And that's what this first revision does here. It begins with the subject line, Team Happy Hours, which is a more informative subject line than what we had in the previous message. And it begins, Pradeep, I'd like to express my support for the regular team happy hours you proposed at our most recent team meeting. Please let me know how I can support this initiative. Thanks for being such a thoughtful colleague. Best, Marta. And this message is a huge improvement on the previous version. Not only is it much shorter, it gets to the essential information for Pradeep very quickly. And that second sentence in the first paragraph, the please let me know, that does include a polite command, which we've learned is a bit more reader-focused than those I would like statements. But I think we can push this even further. And to do that, we want to eliminate the I's and my's that still characterize this message. And here's how we would do that. In this third revision of the message, we begin with the subject line. How can I support team happy hours? Right? So we're already framing our subject line as a polite question, which more powerfully motivates action on the part of Pradeep. And then we begin the message itself. Pradeep, you. Notice that we're organizing that first sentence around you rather than I. You have my support for organizing regular team happy hours. How can I support this initiative, right? So we're concluding that first paragraph with an explicit question that invites Pradeep's feedback on this important matter. And then we close, thanks for being such a thoughtful colleague. That's what we call goodwill, which we'll be talking about in a subsequent video lecture. And then we close, best Marta. And that's how you do it, all right? That's how you can take a message that is organized around you and your thought process and transform it into a tight, reader-focused message. Now, if you have not yet watched the video lectures on business style and business diction, please do so as soon as possible. And as I will say throughout this course, many thanks for tuning in.